The whisper moves through the corridors of time, hidden beneath cathedrals and buried within centuries of silence. In the dim light of stained glass, where candle smoke curls upward like forgotten prayers, a name continues to echo: Mary Magdalene. To most, she is a sinner redeemed, a symbol of repentance and grace. But beneath the official story, beneath the marble altars and golden icons, lies another story, one far more unsettling, far more profound. It is a story whispered by monks, encoded in art, and carried across oceans by those who swore oaths of secrecy. It is the story of a bloodline, the most sacred and forbidden lineage in all of human history. Imagine the world 2,000 years ago, dusty roads of Galilee, the faint scent of myrrh and olive oil, the murmuring crowds following a man who spoke of love, forgiveness, and a kingdom not of this earth. Among his closest followers walked a woman, her presence described in fragments and hints. She is there at the cross when all others flee. She is there at the tomb, first to see him risen. Her name, whispered by the wind over the centuries, is Mary of Magdala. And yet, why was her role diminished? Why did history transform her from apostle to penitent? The answer, some say, lies not in theology, but in power. The story of Mary Magdalene is the story of what happens when truth threatens hierarchy. For if her true role were ever revealed, if her connection to Jesus was more than that of disciple and teacher, it would unravel the entire structure built upon the idea of divine celibacy, male apostleship, and institutional control. A woman as co-founder of the faith, a woman as vessel of the divine bloodline, that, for early rulers of faith and empire alike, was too dangerous to allow. Over the centuries, fragments of an alternate narrative survived, in secret texts, in local legends, in the very stones of old churches that bear symbols no one fully explains. In southern France, villagers still tell stories of a mysterious woman arriving by boat, carrying something sacred. In her shadow, dynasties rose, churches were built, and her image, dark-haired, serene, veiled in mystery, was enshrined under new names and symbols: the Black Madonna, the Rose, the Grail. In the quiet corners of monasteries, certain scholars dared to ask forbidden questions. Why did the early Gnostics describe Mary as the beloved companion? Why did they say that she received teachings no man had heard? Why did the Gospel of Mary, hidden for centuries, describe a rivalry between her and Peter, who could not accept that a woman might understand Christ's words more deeply than any of them? The whispers only grew louder in the Middle Ages. Knights returned from the Holy Land with strange relics and stranger knowledge. Secret brotherhoods guarded scrolls that told of a lineage stretching back to the earliest days of the faith, a royal line not born of empire, but of spirit and flesh intertwined. Those who spoke too openly were silenced. Those who sought the truth found themselves at odds with power itself. Yet the story persisted, passed from artist to artist, from monk to mason, coded into symbols that survived even as their meanings were forgotten. And so the question remains, who was Mary Magdalene, truly? A repentant woman from Magdala, a disciple and teacher, or the mother of a royal bloodline that reshaped history in secret? Beneath the cathedrals of Europe, among the frescoes and forgotten vaults, the truth sleeps, waiting for those who dare to look beyond the surface. Perhaps that is why the legends never fade, because deep down, humanity senses that the story we were told is not the whole story, that something sacred, something living, was hidden, not destroyed but concealed, and that this hidden truth, like a heartbeat beneath stone, still pulses quietly through the centuries, whispering of love, of lineage, and of the divine feminine the world tried so hard to erase. The candlelight flickers across an ancient altar. The narrator's voice lowers to a hush. Somewhere, beneath the songs of the faithful, another song begins to rise, faint, ancient, unstoppable. The story is about to unfold. The secret, long buried beneath the weight of history, is about to be revealed. Mary Magdalene's bloodline, The hidden royal secret that was never meant to be spoken begins here. For centuries, Mary Magdalene's true story was obscured, distorted, and reshaped to fit the needs of a developing institution. The woman who walked beside Jesus, who stood at the foot of the cross, who witnessed the resurrection before anyone else, became reimagined as a penitent sinner, a cautionary tale of sin and redemption. How did a figure of such prominence in the earliest Christian circles become reduced to a shadow of her former self? The answer lies in power, in control, and in a relentless effort to rewrite history. From the earliest days of Christianity, the faith was struggling to define itself. Communities were small, beliefs diverse, and interpretations of the teachings of Jesus varied widely. Some followed a strict interpretation emphasizing ritual and hierarchy, while others embraced a mystical, Gnostic vision that placed equal importance on the feminine, the hidden, and the spiritual. Mary Magdalene, according to Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Mary, was not just a follower, but a teacher, a confidant, and the recipient of secret knowledge. She understood Christ's message in ways even the apostles struggled to grasp. Yet the official canon, established by the early councils of the Church, told a different story. In order to consolidate power, certain voices needed to be silenced or reshaped. Mary's role was minimized. Her association with Jesus was recast, not as one of spiritual equality or intimate partnership, but as a tale of sin, repentance, and humility. Popular legends over time even conflated her with unnamed women accused of adultery or immorality, further diminishing her status. In effect, the Church rewrote her narrative to fit the vision of a male-dominated hierarchy, erasing her authority, her insight, and any suggestion that she might have been more than a disciple. Yet the evidence of her prominence persists in whispers, in fragments, and in the texts that were hidden from view. The Gospel of Mary, discovered only in the late 19th century, paints a strikingly different picture. Mary Magdalene as a visionary, one who comforts the fearful apostles, who interprets Christ's teachings with clarity, and who holds a position of spiritual authority that rivals even Peter. Other Gnostic writings, like Pistis Sophia, reinforce her elevated status, describing her as intimately connected to the mysteries of life, death, and the divine plan. These texts suggest that her marginalization was not a reflection of her actual influence, but a deliberate act of suppression. Her story also illustrates the broader tension between the male-dominated orthodoxy and the sacred feminine, a tension that the Church sought to erase. In minimizing Mary Magdalene's importance, the early Church was not just reshaping a single biography, it was rewriting the spiritual blueprint of Christianity itself. The female voice, the divine feminine, the sacred counterpart to the male, all were being systematically muted. Mary's erasure became symbolic of a larger suppression of women's roles in religious authority, and in doing so, it concealed the possibility that she might have carried more than spiritual wisdom, that she might have carried something sacred and tangible, a bloodline, a living continuation of Christ's teachings through flesh and lineage. Legends and myths began to intertwine with history. In the regions where Mary was believed to have traveled after the crucifixion, stories persisted of a woman who carried knowledge, authority, and perhaps even descendants. The Church's efforts to silence these narratives did not completely succeed. They merely pushed them into the shadows. Local traditions, oral histories, and secret teachings preserved the memory of a woman who was more than a disciple, a woman who was central to the mysteries that the world was not yet ready to understand. Mary Magdalene, then, becomes a paradox, simultaneously erased and immortalized, diminished and revered. She is a figure whose significance was recognized by those willing to see beyond orthodoxy, and whose story continues to resonate in hidden texts, symbolic art, and local legends. Her life challenges the narrative imposed by history, raising questions about what truths were lost, what knowledge was hidden, and what sacred roles women may have played in the earliest days of Christianity. Her marginalization was not simply about history. It was about power, secrecy, and control. In reducing her to a penitent sinner, those who sought to shape Christianity ensured that the story of the Magdalene bloodline, if it existed, would remain concealed. And yet, the fragments that survived, whispers in Gnostic texts, coded imagery, and oral traditions, would provide the seeds of a mystery that centuries later, scholars, mystics, and seekers would attempt to unravel. Mary Magdalene was not simply a follower. She was a keeper of knowledge, a possessor of secrets, and perhaps the guardian of a legacy that threatened the very structures of power. To understand her, we must look beyond what was written in the sanctioned texts, beyond the sanitized accounts of her life, and into the forbidden stories that reveal a woman of extraordinary influence, whose true story has been hidden for almost 2,000 years. Her erasure, paradoxically, only amplified her power as a symbol. For those who listen carefully, who read between the lines of history, the story that emerges is not one of repentance alone, but of mystery, authority, and an enduring presence that refuses to be forgotten. In understanding what the Church tried to erase, we come closer to glimpsing the secrets that Mary Magdalene herself may have carried, secrets that reach far beyond faith into the realm of hidden lineages and sacred bloodlines. The sands of Egypt held a secret for nearly 2,000 years, buried beneath the heat and silence of the desert. In 1945, a remarkable discovery at Nag Hammadi would send shockwaves through the study of early Christianity and rewrite what scholars thought they knew about Mary Magdalene. Among jars filled with papyrus scrolls, hidden by someone desperate to preserve knowledge from destruction, were texts that had long been considered lost, Gnostic gospels that dared to tell a different story. These writings did not depict Mary as a mere follower or sinner, but as a central figure, a visionary, and, most intriguingly, as a companion entrusted with profound secrets. The Gospel of Mary, the most famous of these texts, challenges the canonical portrayal of the Magdalene. Here, she emerges not only as a confidant, but as an interpreter of Christ's most esoteric teachings. When the apostles question her, Peter even expresses doubt, unable to accept that a woman could grasp the fullness of Jesus' wisdom. Yet Mary reassures them, speaking of visions and knowledge that surpass ordinary understanding, knowledge that hints at a truth far greater than anyone had imagined. This is not merely spiritual authority. It is a suggestion of access to a hidden, perhaps sacred, legacy. The Gnostic texts present a dualistic worldview, where light and darkness, male and female, spirit and flesh, are entwined in a cosmic struggle. Within this framework, Mary is the one who bridges gaps, the mediator between divine insight and human understanding. The teachings she carries are described in symbolic language, full of metaphors about seed and womb, light and hidden fire. To modern readers, the imagery is cryptic, almost poetic, but for initiates of the time, it conveyed something radical, the elevation of the feminine, and perhaps even the notion of a lineage born of sacred union. It is here, in the quiet words of these scrolls, that the first seeds of the bloodline theory begin to appear. The texts are careful, coded, hesitant to speak openly. They describe Mary as the one to whom Jesus revealed secrets that could not be entrusted to men alone. The implication, subtle yet profound, is that her role extended beyond teaching and prophecy into the realm of inheritance, of continuation, of life preserved through generations. Scholars and theologians often dismiss such ideas as symbolic, but when examined alongside later legends of her journey to Gaul, a pattern begins to emerge. Knowledge and perhaps lineage, hidden in plain sight, surviving despite centuries of suppression. Other texts in the Nag Hammadi collection reinforce this vision. The Pistis Sophia describes Mary as a favored disciple who navigates the mysteries of heaven and earth. She is portrayed as a teacher of revelation, someone who has received secret instructions directly from Christ. These are not casual mentions. The texts suggest a hierarchy of understanding, a transmission of knowledge so profound that it could unsettle established authority. Peter, James and the other male apostles may have held prominence in the public narrative, but Mary Magdalene held a power that was quietly revolutionary. The very act of suppressing these texts is telling. For centuries, authorities sought to control which writings were deemed canonical and which were dangerous. What was preserved in Nag Hammadi was hidden in jars and buried in the desert, likely to protect it from destruction by those who feared the disruptive power of its content. The Church's official canon would go on to omit these texts entirely, silencing the Magdalene narrative in the process. Yet the survival of these scrolls suggests that others, somewhere in the shadows, were determined to ensure the story of Mary and the knowledge she carried would endure. The Gnostic depiction of Mary Magdalene also presents a radical view of the relationship between her and Jesus. While mainstream texts focus on spiritual leadership and discipleship, the hidden Gospels hint at a partnership that may have been both spiritual and personal. She is described as understanding him in ways that no other apostle does, questioning him, comforting him, and receiving wisdom that would not be entrusted to anyone else. The language is delicate, coded, and poetic, perhaps intentionally so, to conceal the depth of her role from those unprepared to receive it. Through these discoveries, a subtle but powerful tension emerges between what history tells us and what these hidden texts reveal. On one hand, Mary is erased, her role minimized in the stories repeated in churches across Europe. On the other, she stands central in texts meant for those who sought truth beyond orthodoxy. She becomes a figure caught between revelation and suppression, a symbol of knowledge that must survive in secret, awaiting the day when the world might be ready to listen. As we study these writings, a pattern emerges, one that echoes through centuries, one that hints at a larger mystery. Mary Magdalene was not merely a follower of Jesus. She may have been the keeper of a secret so profound it challenged the very foundation of male-dominated authority. Whether this secret was spiritual, symbolic, or genetic, the text suggests continuity, a legacy meant to endure beyond her lifetime. The discovery at Nag Hammadi, then, is not merely an archaeological curiosity. It is a keyhole into a hidden history, a whisper from the past that invites us to consider what was deliberately concealed and why. In understanding Mary Magdalene through these Gnostic eyes, we begin to see a woman of extraordinary insight, courage, and authority. A woman whose story was so threatening to power that it was buried, only to resurface in fragments and whispers. It is from this whisper that the next chapter of the story begins. Her flight from the Holy Land, her journey to distant lands, and the possible continuation of her lineage. The secret she carried did not end at the tomb. It traveled silently and invisibly into the heart of Europe, planting the seeds of a legacy that history would try to erase, but which legends and hidden texts continue to protect. The story of Mary Magdalene, as told in whispered legends and hidden texts, does not end at the empty tomb. If the Gospels and Gnostic writings are to be trusted, she took with her more than grief and devotion. She carried secrets, sacred knowledge, and perhaps a lineage destined to shape history in ways the world would never openly acknowledge. After the crucifixion, the Holy Land became dangerous, a place of fear and persecution. Rome tightened its grip, the Sanhedrin sought to quell dissent, and followers of Christ scattered to the winds. It was during this perilous time that Mary Magdalene's journey took her far from the eyes of history, across seas and into lands that would become central to the survival of her secret. Tradition holds that Mary, accompanied by a small group of loyal followers, including Joseph of Arimathea, traveled westward, eventually reaching the coast of southern Gaul, modern-day France. The legend paints a haunting image, a small, weather-beaten boat gliding silently across the Mediterranean, carrying the woman who had once stood at the foot of the cross and now bore the weight of something far greater. What did she carry? Perhaps relics, manuscripts, sacred vessels, or even the beginnings of a bloodline that the world was not meant to know. Local lore whispers of a mysterious arrival at the site, now called Saint-Omer, a small fishing village that would become forever linked with her legend. In the centuries that followed, her presence left subtle yet enduring marks on the landscape. The Black Madonna, venerated in Provence and throughout southern France, is believed by some scholars to be a reflection of Mary herself, a recognition of her sacred role hidden beneath layers of legend and symbolism. These statues and icons, dark-faced and serene, are unlike the traditional depictions of European saints. Some claim their mysterious origin points directly to her arrival and the influence she wielded in her new home. Pilgrimages to these sites, still undertaken today, seem to carry echoes of her hidden journey, as though her presence had never truly vanished. But why Gaul? The region, distant from Rome's immediate control, offered refuge and secrecy. Small communities there were able to preserve esoteric knowledge, combining Christian teachings with older Celtic and pagan traditions. In these hidden pockets, the early followers of Magdalene may have found a way to continue their work without interference. The suggestion that Mary's sacred mission included establishing a lineage here begins to take shape, a bloodline not of kings, but of knowledge, spiritual authority, and perhaps divine inheritance, carefully nurtured under the veil of ordinary life. Stories of her arrival, though shrouded in myth, are strikingly consistent across different sources. Medieval texts describe a noblewoman or saintly figure landing on the shores of the Camargue, accompanied by companions carrying precious relics. The villagers reportedly received them with awe and wonder, sensing that something extraordinary had arrived in their midst. The narrative speaks of hidden treasures, secret teachings, and sacred symbols, all protected by those who understood their importance. These tales, repeated quietly over generations, preserve a memory of her arrival and hint at the magnitude of what she brought with her. Some scholars draw connections between her sojourn in southern Gaul and the later emergence of the Merovingian dynasty, a line of kings whose origins are shrouded in mystery. Could the first seeds of a royal bloodline have been sown here, in secret, under Mary's guidance or influence? The suggestion is controversial, yet the symbolism, local lore, and historical coincidences are compelling. From the flowering of sacred sites to the emergence of certain noble families in the region, the traces of Mary's presence seem to persist, as though the land itself remembers her. The notion of a hidden journey also aligns with other esoteric traditions. The Magdalene narrative overlaps with stories of holy vessels, secret knowledge, and initiatory teachings traveling from the east to the west. Her journey becomes more than a flight from danger. It becomes a deliberate mission, a migration of wisdom and power across continents. The symbolism is unmistakable, a woman bearing a sacred legacy, traveling by sea to plant the roots of a secret that will survive persecution, time, and the attempts of powerful institutions to erase it. Yet the challenge lies in separating history from legend. Medieval chroniclers, local villagers, and later mystics all contributed fragments to the story, blending fact with devotional myth. Each retelling adds layers of secrecy, protection, and sacred weight, suggesting that the truth was never meant to be spoken openly. What remains constant, however, is her extraordinary role in shaping the spiritual and possibly genealogical landscape of Europe. Mary Magdalene was not merely surviving. She was ensuring the continuity of something precious, sacred, and hidden, far from the watchful eyes of those who might have destroyed it. In contemplating her flight to Gaul, one begins to see a deliberate strategy. Knowledge, bloodline, and sacred legacy were intertwined, protected by geography, secrecy, and devotion. The villages of southern France became silent witnesses to her presence, their rituals, myths, and sacred icons carrying echoes of her mission through centuries. The pilgrimage sites, the Black Madonnas, and the carefully preserved local legends all testify to a woman whose influence went far beyond the walls of Jerusalem, leaving a mark not in public chronicles, but in the hidden, whispered layers of history. Mary Magdalene's journey to Gaul is more than a legend. It is the foundation for a narrative that stretches across time, connecting biblical events to medieval mysticism, hidden knowledge, and perhaps even royal lineage. Every step she took, every place she touched, carries significance, a subtle reminder that history often conceals as much as it reveals. And in these quiet coastal villages, along the salt-swept shores and under the shadow of ancient churches, her secret begins to take root, setting the stage for centuries of mystery, guardianship, and the whisper of a lineage that would endure, invisible yet indelible, through the ages. Hidden beneath the rolling hills of southern France lies a small village whose quiet streets and sun-bleached stone hide a story that has fascinated historians, mystics, and treasure hunters for over a century. Rennes-le-Château, perched atop a hill in the Languedoc region, appears at first glance to be unremarkable. Its church is weathered by time, its houses modest. Yet in the late 19th century, this sleepy village became the epicenter of one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. At the heart of it was Béranger Saunière, a parish priest whose sudden wealth and obsession with church renovations ignited speculation that continues to this day. What did Saunière discover? Some claim he unearthed documents, parchments, or even treasures pointing to the most guarded secret of all, a sacred bloodline descending from Mary Magdalene. Saunière's life was ordinary until he began renovating the church of Saint Mary Magdalene. As he worked, strange symbols, coded inscriptions, and hidden chambers seemed to reveal themselves to him. Some records suggest he found letters or parchments that hinted at the survival of Mary Magdalene's descendants in Europe, secrets that powerful institutions had long sought to suppress. The idea that a priest could stumble upon such knowledge in a quiet French village seems improbable, yet the details of his transformation, his sudden acquisition of wealth, his mysterious travels, and his private research suggest that he uncovered something extraordinary. The church itself became a canvas for coded messages, murals, altarpieces, and inscriptions that seemed ordinary at first glance contain layers of symbolism. Cryptic letters, astrological symbols, and depictions of biblical scenes with subtle deviations that some scholars interpret as hints pointing to hidden truths. The placement of these symbols was deliberate, designed to communicate messages to those who knew how to read them, while remaining invisible to the uninitiated. Every carved figure, every painted flourish, becomes part of a puzzle that, when assembled, hints at a story too dangerous or too sacred to be openly told. The legend of Saunière's discovery intersects with tales of hidden treasure, sacred relics, and secret knowledge passed down for centuries. Some claim he found the parchments linked to the Priory of Chaon, a secret society sworn to protect the lineage of Christ and Mary Magdalene. Whether these claims are factual or the product of exaggeration, the notion itself underscores the enduring belief that the Magdalene bloodline was protected, preserved, and hidden from public view. The idea that a simple village priest could stumble upon such a secret fuels the allure, blending history, mystery, and speculation into a narrative that has captivated generations. Rennes-le-Château also exemplifies the tension between revealed knowledge and institutional suppression. The church, aware of the implications of what Saunière may have uncovered, monitored his activities closely. Some historians argue that his sudden wealth and the inexplicable prosperity he achieved were not merely financial anomalies, but part of a larger story involving secret guardianship and hidden inheritance. In this context, Rennes-le-Château becomes more than a village. It becomes a symbol of the places where history and secrecy intersect, where truths too dangerous to be widely known are safeguarded in quiet corners of the world. Local legends add another layer to the mystery. Villagers spoke of clandestine meetings, of coded messages delivered in plain sight, and of symbols carved into walls whose meanings were understood only by the few who knew the secret. The church bells themselves, the layout of the village, and even the paths through the surrounding hills are said to encode information, a spatial memory of the sacred legacy hidden beneath Rennes-le-Château. These stories, handed down through generations, reinforce the notion that this place was no ordinary village. It was a focal point of a secret history, a silent guardian of knowledge that could reshape the understanding of the past. The allure of Rennes-le-Château is not merely the mystery of treasure or hidden documents. It is the possibility that the village is a crossroads where spiritual, historical, and genealogical secrets converge. The very stones of the village, the architecture of the church, and the faint whispers of local lore suggest a continuity with the Magdalene legend. It is as if the land itself remembers the arrival of Mary, the hidden bloodline, and the generations who sought to protect it. As historians and esoteric scholars examine the evidence, a pattern emerges. Rennes-le-Château is part of a chain of places across Europe where the story of Mary Magdalene's descendants, her sacred legacy, was quietly preserved. The village's symbols, hidden parchments, and coded artwork are not anomalies. They are deliberate acts of preservation, reminders that history has layers beneath what is written, recorded, and officially sanctioned. Saunier's discovery, whether fully understood or not, is a reminder that even the smallest, most unassuming corners of the world can harbor secrets that challenge our understanding of history, religion, and power. In Rennes-le-Château, the past is never entirely past. Every mural, every carved inscription, every whispered story points toward a hidden truth, that Mary Magdalene's story did not end at the cross or the tomb. Her presence, her influence, and perhaps her bloodline survived in secret, quietly weaving through history in ways that only a few could recognize. The village stands as both witness and guardian, a silent sentinel of the mystery that has endured for centuries and will continue to invite curiosity, speculation, and awe. The origins of the Merovingian dynasty are wrapped in as much mystery as Rennes-le-Château itself. These early Frankish kings, with their long flowing hair and enigmatic symbols, ruled over Gaul in the 5th and 6th centuries, yet the true nature of their authority remains elusive. Chroniclers describe them as semi-divine, chosen by God, yet some historians and esoteric scholars suggest their power may have stemmed from something far more secretive, a sacred lineage, whispered to descend from Mary Magdalene herself. If true, this connection would transform our understanding of European history, linking the earliest Christian mysteries to the foundations of medieval royalty. The Merovingians were known as the long-haired kings, and their hair was more than a fashion statement. It was a symbol of divine authority. Folklore suggested that cutting a king's hair could strip him of power, a ritualistic reminder of the mystical forces at work within their line. This symbolism becomes even more intriguing when considered alongside legends of Mary Magdalene's arrival in Gaul. Could these semi-mythical rulers have been the descendants of her bloodline, guardians of a secret knowledge passed down through generations? The idea, controversial though it may be, is repeated in various texts, legends, and later esoteric writings, all hinting at a lineage both royal and sacred. Bees, a recurring emblem associated with the Merovingians, add another layer to the mystery. Often seen in their coins and seals, the bee is a symbol of immortality, resurrection, and the continuity of life. Some esoteric scholars argue that these symbols were intentionally chosen to indicate a connection to a sacred feminine bloodline, the continuation of Mary Magdalene's lineage hidden within the public life of kings and nobles. The bees, long overlooked by mainstream historians, may have been a coded signal, a secret that only initiates or those aware of the legend could interpret. The Merovingians also maintained traditions and rituals that seemed to differ from neighboring dynasties. Their coronations, marriages, and even burial practices were imbued with symbolism that some interpret as protective measures for a sacred line. Ancient manuscripts and later medieval writings hint at secretive practices surrounding marriage, succession, and the preservation of bloodlines. These elements, while obscured by time, contribute to the notion that the Merovingians were more than political rulers. They were guardians of a hidden heritage, tasked with protecting a legacy that threatened conventional power structures. Some historians link these kings to the mysterious Priory of Chaon, a secret society said to have been founded to protect the descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene. While the priory's historical existence is debated, its association with the Merovingians is central to many theories about hidden European lineages. The society, operating in secrecy for centuries, may have ensured that knowledge of the sacred bloodline survived wars, invasions, and dynastic upheavals. Through marriages, alliances, and covert influence, the Merovingians maintained a thread of continuity that preserved this legacy far beyond what ordinary history records. The contrast between the public perception of the Merovingians and their possible secret purpose is striking. On the surface, they were kings of Gaul, rulers concerned with governance, conquest, and politics. Beneath that veneer, some believe, they carried a mission of spiritual and genealogical significance, maintaining a sacred heritage that linked them, invisibly, to one of the most powerful women in early Christianity. The tension between visible power and hidden purpose echoes the larger story of Mary Magdalene herself. Revered, yet concealed. Influential, yet denied acknowledgement. Artifacts and historical records provide tantalizing hints, but no definitive proof. Coins stamped with unusual symbols, obscure references in medieval chronicles, and local legends all point to an extraordinary heritage. Yet these traces remain ambiguous, requiring interpretation and conjecture. It is in this ambiguity that the fascination persists, for the line between myth and reality blurs, leaving space for wonder, speculation, and the possibility that something truly sacred survived through the ages in secret. The symbolism embedded in the Merovingian lineage, long hair, bees, sacred rituals, suggests a deliberate attempt to preserve identity, memory, and continuity. Whether these kings were literal descendants of Mary Magdalene or symbolic inheritors of her spiritual authority, their story demonstrates how the notion of sacred bloodlines can intertwine with political power, art, and ritual to create a hidden narrative that survives across centuries. In tracing the Merovingians, we see a confluence of legend, genealogy, and esoteric tradition. The king's apparent divine right, their mysterious practices, and the symbols they left behind may all point toward a legacy inherited from Mary Magdalene, carefully protected and deliberately obscured. The threads of her presence, her wisdom, her influence, her sacred bloodline, seem to weave through the fabric of early European royalty, hinting at a continuity that history has struggled to acknowledge, yet that continues to inspire intrigue and speculation to this day. Rennes-le-Château, Mary Magdalene's arrival in Gaul, and the Merovingian kings together form a tapestry of secrecy and inheritance, blending legend with potential historical truth. The bloodline that may have begun with Mary did not vanish. It was concealed within the power, symbols, and rituals of a dynasty whose legacy remains shrouded in mystery. And it is here, in the convergence of faith, royalty, and secrecy, that the story of the Magdalene bloodline begins to take shape in a way that transcends ordinary history, hinting at a hidden reality that has survived through centuries of silence, suppression, and awe. In the shadowed corners of European history, rumors persisted of a secret society whose purpose was unlike any other: to protect a sacred lineage, to guard knowledge so dangerous that it could shake the foundations of faith itself. This society, known as the Priory of Chaon, is said to have been founded in the late 11th century, though its roots may stretch further back into the mists of medieval Europe. Its members were tasked with a singular, sacred mission: to preserve the bloodline of Christ and Mary Magdalene, ensuring its survival across centuries, hidden from the prying eyes of those who might seek to destroy it. The Priory of Chaon presents a fascinating paradox. On the one hand, it appears in historical records as a modest religious organization. On the other, secret documents, most famously the dossiers secrets deposited in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in the 1960s, claim a far deeper purpose. These papers, whether wholly authentic or partially fabricated, suggest that some of the most illustrious figures of European history were members: Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Victor Hugo. The notion that such brilliant minds might have been part of silent guardianship, protecting a secret lineage through centuries of upheaval, adds an almost cinematic dimension to the story. The purpose of the priory, according to these sources, was not merely ceremonial or symbolic. It was deeply practical. The society allegedly maintained meticulous genealogical records, safeguarded manuscripts and relics, and transmitted knowledge only to those deemed worthy. Its members operated in secrecy, weaving themselves into the courts of kings, the halls of power, and the hidden networks of European nobility. Their mission was both spiritual and protective. The bloodline of Mary Magdalene, believed to carry divine or mystical significance, had to survive even if the rest of the world remained ignorant. What makes the priory particularly fascinating is its continuity across centuries. While kingdoms rose and fell, while the Catholic Church grew in power and influence, this society supposedly persisted, quietly guiding the destiny of Europe from the shadows. Its existence suggests that the Magdalene bloodline was never forgotten, that it was carefully guarded and protected through layers of myth, legend, and secrecy. Even as historical documents were rewritten or destroyed, and as saints and kings came and went, the priory ensured that this sacred lineage endured. The society's influence is said to extend into art, architecture, and literature. Leonardo da Vinci, for example, is believed by some researchers to have embedded clues about the sacred bloodline in his paintings and notebooks. The famous Last Supper, with its subtle placements and enigmatic figures, may not simply depict a biblical scene. It may encode a hidden truth, a silent acknowledgement of the Magdalene lineage. Similarly, Gothic cathedrals and European manuscripts carry symbols and messages that the priory allegedly used to communicate across generations. These signs, hidden in plain sight, are a testament to a civilization's ability to preserve knowledge beneath layers of art, devotion, and ritual. The Priory of Chaon, however, was not merely a collection of scholars and artists. It was also a network of guardians. Its members understood the danger inherent in revealing the secret too widely. History had repeatedly shown that those who sought forbidden knowledge often faced persecution, exile, or death. By operating in secrecy, the priory protected both the lineage and the knowledge it carried, ensuring that its significance could survive for future generations who might be ready to understand it. One of the most compelling aspects of the priory legend is the way it connects disparate threads of European history. From the arrival of Mary Magdalene in Gaul to the Merovingian dynasty, from secret manuscripts to coded works of art, the society provides a unifying thread. It becomes the invisible hand guiding the preservation of a story deliberately hidden from history. The bloodline of a woman whose influence was as profound as it was forbidden. The priory's role suggests that history is not merely a record of events, but a carefully curated narrative, with guardians working silently to protect truths that could disrupt the accepted order. Skeptics often question the existence of the priory, dismissing it as fabrication or conspiracy. Yet even if parts of the story are mythologized, the impact of these ideas is undeniable. The legend of a secret society safeguarding a sacred bloodline has influenced centuries of inquiry, inspired works of literature and art, and shaped the way historians and esoteric scholars think about hidden histories. Its persistence in public imagination is itself a clue. Societies of secrecy have always operated at the intersection of fear, reverence, and power, and the priory embodies that tradition in a uniquely captivating way. Ultimately, the Priory of Chaon, whether real or allegorical, serves as a lens through which to view the Magdalene bloodline. It reinforces the idea that Mary Magdalene's legacy was not meant to vanish, that her influence persisted quietly, embedded in the art, literature, and institutions of Europe. By protecting her story, the priory maintained a thread of continuity, ensuring that even in the absence of public recognition, the sacred lineage endured. The notion of such a society invites us to consider that history is not always what it seems, and that secrets, carefully preserved, may lie just beneath the surface, waiting for those patient enough to uncover them. The story of the priory is a bridge between past and present, legend and fact, faith and secrecy. It reminds us that beneath the surface of recorded history, there may exist entire networks of guardians, preserving truths too powerful for the world to know. In the context of Mary Magdalene, it becomes not just a tale of conspiracy, but a testament to the endurance of a sacred lineage, a mystery that spans centuries and continues to captivate the imagination. Leonardo da Vinci, a man whose genius continues to astonish the world, may have been more than an artist, inventor, and scientist. Some scholars and theorists suggest that he was also a keeper of secrets, a silent guardian of knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. His works, from sketches and notebooks to grandiose paintings, may not merely reflect human achievement, but also a deliberate encoding of truths too sensitive to be openly spoken. Among these secrets, many believe, is the story of Mary Magdalene and her sacred bloodline. Truths so profound that they could shake the foundations of established religion and history if ever fully revealed. Nowhere is this more striking than in Leonardo's iconic masterpiece, The Last Supper. At first glance, it appears to depict the biblical scene of Jesus and his 12 apostles at the table. Yet careful observation reveals anomalies that defy conventional interpretation. One of the most discussed elements is the figure seated to Jesus' right, traditionally thought to be John the Apostle. Certain scholars argue that this figure is, in fact, Mary Magdalene. Her posture, facial features, and positioning suggest closeness, intimacy, and even symbolic significance. Leonardo, who was known for embedding complex symbolism in his works, may have deliberately encoded her presence as a subtle acknowledgement of her central role in the early Christian story. Further scrutiny of Leonardo's art reveals a fascination with balance, duality, and hidden messages. He frequently used light, shadow, geometry, and perspective to convey meanings beyond the obvious. In paintings such as Madonna of the Rocks or Saint John the Baptist, subtle shapes and symbolic gestures hint at a narrative that intertwines masculine and feminine, visible and concealed, spiritual and worldly. Some esoteric scholars suggest that these works preserve knowledge about the sacred feminine and the Magdalene bloodline, hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those with insight and understanding of symbolic language. Leonardo's notebooks provide additional clues. Filled with sketches, mirrored writings, and coded diagrams, they reveal a mind obsessed with uncovering hidden truths. Among anatomical studies, engineering concepts, and observational notes, there appear symbols, cryptic references, and geometric patterns that hint at mystical or spiritual knowledge. Some researchers argue that these were not mere artistic exercises but attempts to safeguard the memory of Mary Magdalene and her sacred lineage, transmitting knowledge through symbols that could endure even if direct disclosure was impossible. The concept of secrecy in Leonardo's work is not merely about concealment. It is about survival. During his time, the Church maintained strict control over religious interpretation, and ideas that challenged orthodoxy could be dangerous. If Leonardo truly understood or believed in the existence of a sacred bloodline descending from Mary Magdalene, he would have needed to encode this knowledge in ways that could survive scrutiny, hidden beneath the guise of religious artwork and scientific exploration. His genius provided the perfect vehicle for this dual purpose: to educate, inspire, and protect knowledge simultaneously. Art, in Leonardo's vision, becomes a form of language, a repository of hidden truths. Figures, gestures, colors, and spatial arrangements are all potentially laden with meaning. For instance, the positioning of hands and the spaces between figures in the Last Supper may encode numerological or symbolic messages, conveying relationships, hierarchies, or secrets about lineage. Scholars studying these works often describe a sense of deliberate ambiguity, as though Leonardo intended for questions to arise, for curiosity to be piqued, and for those who could read the signs to understand what the wider world could not yet know. The notion that a single artist could carry forward a centuries-old secret seems extraordinary, yet in the context of the Priory of Chaon and the broader narrative of Mary Magdalene, it becomes plausible. Leonardo's lifetime coincided with renewed interest in ancient knowledge, the rise of secret societies, and the revival of classical learning during the Renaissance. Within this cultural landscape, the preservation of forbidden or hidden wisdom could find fertile ground. Leonardo, with his exceptional intellect and access to patrons and scholars, may have been uniquely positioned to serve as both artist and covert historian. This interpretation transforms our understanding of Renaissance art. Rather than being purely devotional or aesthetic, paintings such as The Last Supper can be seen as encrypted messages deliberately designed to protect knowledge, celebrate the sacred feminine, and honor Mary Magdalene's legacy. The duality of what is visible and what is concealed mirrors the larger story of her bloodline. Present, influential, yet hidden from the mainstream record. Through Leonardo, a secret survived, transmitted across centuries, waiting for those patient enough to discern its meaning. The implications are profound. If Leonardo's works encode knowledge of Mary Magdalene, then art itself becomes a vessel of history, a silent witness to truths that history sought to erase. His genius ensured that the Magdalene story could continue, hidden in plain sight, bridging the gap between sacred past and curious present. The subtle interplay of symbolism, geometry, and narrative becomes a testament to both the endurance of secret knowledge and the lengths to which humans will go to preserve it. Leonardo da Vinci, in this view, is more than an artist. He is a custodian of mystery, a guardian of sacred lineage, and a bridge between past and future. His works invite us to look beyond the obvious, to question the official narratives, and to consider that beneath the surface of celebrated art lies a story that has endured for centuries. Mary Magdalene's hidden presence, her influence, and perhaps the very secret of her bloodline. The Grail, long shrouded in legend and myth, has captivated imaginations for centuries. Tales of knights questing across Europe, of enchanted cups and holy vessels, of untold treasures and mystical powers, have been retold in countless forms. Yet, when viewed through the lens of Mary Magdalene's story, the Grail takes on a radically different meaning. It is no longer merely a chalice or relic. It becomes a symbol, a cipher, and perhaps even a vessel of lineage itself. The Grail, in this interpretation, represents the continuity of a sacred bloodline, the descendants of Mary Magdalene, hidden, protected, and honored through centuries of legend and ritual. The etymology of the Grail offers a subtle clue. The term sangreal, often rendered as Holy Grail, may also be interpreted as royal blood. This linguistic nuance transforms the familiar story of a quest for a physical cup into a narrative about lineage, inheritance, and the preservation of a sacred heritage. The Grail becomes not an object to be possessed, but a living legacy to be safeguarded, a continuity of life and divinity intertwined, symbolizing both blood and spirit. Through this lens, the medieval Grail legends are no longer whimsical myths. They are encoded stories, carrying the memory of a woman whose role in history was deliberately obscured. Arthurian romances, such as Parzival and Le Morte d'Arthur, offer further evidence of this symbolic interpretation. Knights embark on journeys fraught with peril, seeking the Grail not merely for worldly gain, but to restore balance, to fulfill a sacred destiny, or to reconnect with a lost truth. These narratives, layered in allegory and spiritual symbolism, hint at knowledge of a bloodline worth protecting, one whose preservation carries both political and mystical significance. The Grail quests may thus be viewed as metaphors for the search for truth, lineage, and continuity, echoing the hidden journey of Mary Magdalene and her descendants. The symbolism extends beyond literature into medieval iconography and sacred art. Flowers, geometric patterns, chalices, and female figures appear repeatedly in Grail-related depictions, suggesting the presence of feminine energy at the heart of these myths. Some interpretations link these images directly to Mary Magdalene, portraying her as the guardian of sacred knowledge and the living vessel of the divine line. Her representation, often veiled or obscured, signals both her importance and the secrecy surrounding her true role in the spiritual and genealogical history of Europe. Templar connections further enrich the Grail legend. The Knights Templar, renowned for their expeditions to the Holy Land and their subsequent secretive practices, are often credited with safeguarding sacred knowledge brought from Jerusalem to Europe. Some esoteric scholars argue that the Templars understood the Grail not as a cup, but as a symbolic marker of Mary Magdalene's lineage, a living heritage they were sworn to protect. Their sudden rise to wealth and influence, their mysterious rituals, and their catastrophic downfall all suggest that they were entangled with a secret too potent to reveal openly. In this context, the Grail becomes an emblem of continuity, secrecy, and devotion, not merely a relic of legend. The Grail narratives also emphasize duality, masculine and feminine, visible and hidden, spiritual and worldly. This duality mirrors the story of Mary Magdalene herself. She is both human and divine, marginalized yet central, erased yet preserved. The Grail, as a symbol of her bloodline, embodies this tension. It represents a lineage that is simultaneously sacred and secret, one whose existence challenges conventional power structures while preserving the spiritual equilibrium that Mary Magdalene's story embodies. Furthermore, the Grail's association with quests, trials, and revelations underscores the idea that knowledge of this bloodline was never meant to be easily obtained. Just as knights had to prove themselves worthy through courage, purity, and insight, so too must seekers of the Magdalene's secret demonstrate understanding, discernment, and patience. The Grail, then, becomes a metaphor for discovery, not of material treasure, but of hidden truth, spiritual inheritance, and the enduring legacy of Mary Magdalene. Even the architecture and landscapes connected to Grail legends hint at this symbolic significance. Castles, chapels, and sacred sites often contain hidden symbols, encoded numbers, and arrangements aligned with cosmic or mystical principles. These subtle markers suggest deliberate attempts to safeguard and transmit knowledge through generations, a silent testimony to the sacred continuity the Grail represents. Across Europe, the traces of Mary Magdalene's legacy, encoded in stories, symbols, and secretive orders, echo the path of the Grail, obscure, protected, and revered. In this light, the Grail ceases to be a mere object of legend and becomes a living symbol of a sacred mission, the protection of Mary Magdalene's bloodline. Each quest, each story, and each symbol is a reminder that what is hidden can endure, that lineage and knowledge may persist in secrecy, and that the truth, though obscured, continues to pulse through history, waiting for those patient enough to uncover it. The Grail, therefore, is both metaphor and reality, a vessel not only of blood but of memory, of divine feminine energy, and of the sacred secrets that Mary Magdalene carried. It is a bridge connecting the past with the present, a silent witness to centuries of guardianship, devotion, and hidden truth. In understanding the Grail in this way, we begin to glimpse the depth of her influence, the careful protection of her legacy, and the profound mystery that continues to inspire seekers, scholars, and dreamers alike. The Cathars, a mystical and persecuted sect that flourished in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries, represent one of the most fascinating chapters in the story of Mary Magdalene and her hidden legacy. Unlike the dominant Catholic Church, which emphasized hierarchy, ritual, and worldly authority, the Cathars embraced a spiritual worldview centered on purity, duality, and the struggle between light and darkness. Some scholars argue that their beliefs and practices were influenced by older Gnostic traditions, those same traditions that elevated Mary Magdalene to a position of spiritual authority and hinted at a sacred bloodline. In this sense, the Cathars may have been indirect custodians of her legacy, preserving fragments of knowledge that the mainstream church sought to erase. The Cathars believed in the separation of spirit and matter, viewing the material world as flawed or even corrupt. This perspective placed them at odds with the established church, which wielded both spiritual and temporal power. For the Cathars, salvation was achieved through purity, knowledge, and alignment with the divine light. Within this framework, the feminine divine was celebrated, not suppressed, a stark contrast to the male-dominated orthodoxy of the time. Mary Magdalene, in this context, could have been revered as a symbol of spiritual wisdom and divine femininity, her teachings and lineage resonating with Cathar philosophy and ritual. Geographically, the Cathars thrived in regions long associated with Mary Magdalene's journey, including Languedoc and the surrounding territories. Castles perched atop hills, remote valleys, and hidden villages became strongholds for this persecuted faith. Some historians and esoteric scholars suggest that these locations were chosen not only for their defensibility, but also because they were linked to sites of earlier sacred activity connected to the Magdalene bloodline. By establishing their communities in these regions, the Cathars may have been unknowingly or deliberately continuing a spiritual and genealogical tradition stretching back to her arrival in Gaul. The persecution of the Cathars by the Catholic Church, culminating in the brutal Albigensian Crusade, was as much about spiritual authority as it was about political control. Leaders of the Church feared that the Cathars' alternative vision threatened their dominance and challenged the hierarchical narrative of faith. In targeting the Cathars, the Church sought to eliminate not only heretical beliefs, but also any lingering connections to suppressed knowledge, including the secret legacy of Mary Magdalene. Documents, manuscripts, and oral traditions were destroyed, yet fragments survived, often hidden in plain sight, in symbols, architectural layouts, and coded rituals. The Cathars also maintained their own lineage-based traditions, emphasizing succession and the transmission of spiritual knowledge through initiatory practices. The perfecti, the elite members of the sect, underwent rigorous spiritual training and were considered repositories of sacred wisdom. Within these practices, there are echoes of the Magdalene narrative: secrecy, the safeguarding of knowledge, and the preservation of a spiritual inheritance that could survive despite persecution. It is possible, some theorists argue, that the Cathars became unwitting or intentional protectors of a hidden bloodline, ensuring that Mary Magdalene's legacy continued beyond the reach of mainstream authorities. Art, architecture, and manuscripts associated with Cathar communities are filled with symbolism that aligns with Gnostic and Magdalene traditions. Geometric motifs, representations of duality, and coded inscriptions hint at a worldview that celebrates the sacred feminine and emphasizes hidden knowledge. Even the positioning of castles, churches, and sacred sites in southern France may have encoded subtle messages, guiding initiates and preserving memory across generations. These artifacts suggest a deliberate effort to sustain spiritual continuity and secrecy, keeping the teachings and possibly the lineage of Mary Magdalene intact through turbulent times. The suppression of the Cathars, though devastating, could not completely erase their influence. Their beliefs and symbols persisted in folklore, regional traditions, and later esoteric movements. Scholars have noted similarities between Cathar practices and later secret societies, suggesting a chain of continuity that preserves knowledge of the sacred bloodline. This continuity is subtle, fragmented, and often overlooked, yet it reinforces the idea that Mary Magdalene's story did not end with her death or the closure of early Christian texts. It survived in hidden currents, quietly shaping spiritual movements, genealogical claims, and mystical traditions for centuries. By examining the Cathars, one begins to see a pattern emerge. Regions associated with Mary Magdalene's journey became centers of alternative spirituality, where influence, teachings, and possibly her lineage were subtly honored and protected. The Cathars represent a link in this chain, a testament to the endurance of her legacy, even in the face of annihilation. Their story underscores the tension between visible power and hidden truth, between orthodoxy and esoteric knowledge, revealing that Mary Magdalene's presence extended far beyond what official history acknowledges. The Cathars, therefore, are more than a historical curiosity. They are part of a continuum, a hidden thread that connects the Magdalene bloodline to spiritual, cultural, and even political currents in medieval Europe. Their reverence for the sacred, their insistence on purity, and their resilience in the face of persecution all suggest that Mary Magdalene's legacy was not merely a tale of the past. It was a living, protected force, carried quietly by those who understood its power. In their valleys, castles, and secretive practices, we glimpse a chapter of history where the sacred feminine, hidden knowledge, and lineage converged, waiting for the world to rediscover what had been deliberately obscured. The trail of Mary Magdalene's hidden legacy stretches from the medieval past into the modern world, revealing echoes of her story in ways both subtle and profound. While scholars and mystics have debated her role for centuries, a striking pattern emerges when one examines sites, artifacts, and legends across Europe. A network of locations and symbols that appear deliberately placed to protect knowledge, lineage, and sacred history. Among the most mysterious of these is the cluster of churches, chapels, and pilgrimage sites in southern France, all associated with the Magdalene or the feminine divine, their subtle alignments and cryptic symbols pointing toward a deeper secret that has survived the scrutiny of official history. Take, for example, the crypts and altars of Provence. Across this sun-drenched landscape, hidden chambers, spiral staircases, and secret inscriptions are found within churches dedicated to Mary Magdalene. Many of these features are not mere architectural curiosities. They appear to encode information about her journey, her arrival from the Holy Land, and the continuation of her sacred bloodline. Pilgrims who walk these routes may have unknowingly traced a spiritual map, a pattern that preserved memory, lineage, and knowledge through generations. The geography itself becomes a vessel, a hidden archive etched into stone, wind, and land. Even more intriguing are the relics associated with her presence. Items claimed to belong to Mary Magdalene. Bones, personal objects, or vessels have been venerated in select sites across France. While some relics may be symbolic or legendary, the consistent reverence for these objects points to a conscious effort to maintain her memory and authority. In certain cases, relics were hidden deliberately, accessible only to those initiated into secret knowledge or trusted by guardians of the sacred line. Each relic carries the weight not merely of devotion, but of continuity, linking centuries of custodianship to a lineage whose existence remained intentionally obscured. Codices and manuscripts, some of which only resurfaced in the 19th and 20th centuries, offer further insight. Inscriptions and diagrams within these texts often combine Christian symbology with older Gnostic motifs: wounds, serpents, light, and celestial spheres, hinting at knowledge of divine lineage. The repetition of motifs across separate sites suggests that this was more than coincidence. It was an intentional system of transmission, a cryptic language designed to endure the scrutiny of institutions that sought to suppress it. Scholars who decipher these symbols argue that they point to Mary Magdalene as the central figure, a carrier of sacred wisdom whose bloodline needed protection through coded knowledge. Modern explorations and archaeological studies add compelling layers to the story. Excavations beneath churches in Provence, Rennes-le-Château, and other associated sites have uncovered hidden chambers, foundations, and cryptic inscriptions. Some interpretations suggest these were intentionally designed to safeguard knowledge and relics, creating a network of secret repositories across the landscape. The pattern aligns with legends of pilgrimage and secret guardianship, further supporting the idea that Mary Magdalene's legacy was never fully erased. It was deliberately concealed in plain sight, woven into architecture, ritual, and topography. The symbolism embedded in these sites is striking. Spirals, triangles, and geometric forms recur in altars, floor mosaics, and frescoes, often aligned with celestial events or natural features. These arrangements are reminiscent of Gnostic and esoteric principles, emphasizing cycles, duality, and hidden wisdom. Such intentionality suggests that guardians of the Magdalene lineage were not only preserving objects or bloodlines, but also encoding philosophical and spiritual knowledge meant to guide those who would inherit or protect this sacred legacy. Even local folklore preserves fragments of these secrets. Stories of mysterious women arriving from distant lands, of miraculous healings, and of sacred relics passed down through generations hint at a hidden continuity. Oral traditions, often dismissed by mainstream historians, may carry traces of an unbroken chain linking Mary Magdalene to modern Europe. These narratives, though veiled in myth and legend, reinforce the idea that her story and her lineage endured despite the efforts of powerful institutions to suppress them. The modern era, with its rediscovery of manuscripts, renewed interest in esoteric history, and advanced archaeological techniques, allows us to piece together these fragments. Connections emerge between pilgrimage sites, relics, manuscripts, and sacred art, creating a complex map that traces the enduring influence of Mary Magdalene. Scholars, mystics, and seekers begin to recognize that her legacy was not lost. It was carefully curated, protected, and transmitted through centuries of secrecy, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to see its significance. In considering these sites collectively, a pattern of guardianship becomes clear. Mary Magdalene's influence, teachings, and possibly her bloodline were preserved across time through careful planning, secrecy, and devotion. Churches, relics, manuscripts, and oral traditions form an intricate web, a hidden network designed to safeguard what was deemed too sacred, too powerful, or too threatening for the wider world to know. This network bridges the ancient past with the present, inviting modern seekers to recognize the endurance of a legacy that has persisted through centuries of erasure, persecution, and deliberate concealment. Through these connections, the narrative of Mary Magdalene expands beyond biblical accounts and medieval legend into a living, ongoing history. Her story becomes a testament to resilience, secrecy, and the power of memory preserved through time. In modern exploration, whether archaeological, historical, or esoteric, we glimpse the threads of a continuity that defies official narratives, revealing a legacy that has survived not by accident, but through careful, deliberate guardianship. Mary Magdalene's hidden journey, her sacred bloodline, and her enduring presence continue to ripple through the centuries, quietly shaping history, belief, and the imagination of all who seek the truth. The question of Mary Magdalene's bloodline is one that has fascinated and divided scholars, mystics, and historians for centuries. While mainstream history often treats the idea as mere speculation, alternative perspectives suggest that a secret lineage, safeguarded through generations, may indeed have persisted, hidden beneath layers of legend, ritual, and esoteric practice. This section delves into the possible continuation of her lineage, examining clues from historical records, symbolic art, and genealogical theories that hint at descendants quietly shaping European history from the shadows. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from the Merovingian dynasty, whose mysterious origins and symbolism have long intrigued researchers. The long-haired kings of Gaul, rulers whose authority seemed both temporal and mystical, may have been heirs, whether literal or symbolic, of Mary Magdalene's line. Their long hair, often described as a mark of divine right, could represent an encoded signal of sacred heritage, a visible sign of a bloodline infused with both spiritual and mystical authority. Coupled with the esoteric symbols of bees and other imagery associated with their reign, a pattern emerges that aligns closely with the preservation of a sacred lineage. Beyond the Merovingians, historical speculation suggests that Mary Magdalene's descendants may have married into influential European families, creating hidden networks of power and influence. These connections were rarely public. Rather, they were subtle, coded into traditions, rituals, and symbols that outsiders could not decipher. The idea that the bloodline was intentionally concealed is reinforced by the persistent appearance of figures in European history who were associated with secret knowledge, spiritual authority, or unexplained influence over political and cultural developments. In this light, the bloodline is less about literal royalty and more about a lineage of custodianship, spiritual inheritance, and the protection of sacred knowledge. Art and literature provide additional, often overlooked clues. Paintings, stained glass, and illuminated manuscripts frequently feature female figures positioned in ways that suggest importance, wisdom, and hidden authority. Some of these depictions, particularly in southern France, echo imagery connected to Mary Magdalene and her journey from the Holy Land. Whether deliberate or symbolic, these artistic choices reinforce the notion that her presence, and potentially her descendants, was being acknowledged subtly, even as public narratives sought to minimize her role. The concept of secrecy is central to understanding how a bloodline might have survived. Guardians, whether members of the Priory of Chaon, Templar allies, or other clandestine networks, ensured that the lineage remained protected. Knowledge of marriages, genealogical connections, and sacred responsibilities was passed down through carefully maintained records, coded symbols, and oral traditions. This hidden transmission allowed the bloodline to endure even during periods of political upheaval, religious persecution, and social change, preserving both the spiritual and genealogical legacy of Mary Magdalene. Esoteric scholars also point to the notion of the feminine divine as a critical aspect of this lineage. Unlike male-centered inheritance, the Magdalene bloodline may have been preserved through women, passed along quietly through families who understood their sacred responsibility. This concept aligns with Gnostic traditions and later mystical movements, which emphasize the role of the feminine in spiritual authority, wisdom, and the continuation of divine knowledge. By maintaining secrecy, the custodians ensured that the lineage was not only protected physically but also spiritually, keeping it aligned with the principles that Mary Magdalene herself embodied. The survival of the bloodline is also suggested by coded inscriptions and hidden symbols embedded in architecture, manuscripts, and heraldry across Europe. These signs, often overlooked or dismissed by mainstream historians, indicate deliberate efforts to preserve genealogical memory, linking families and sites back to a sacred origin. Whether in the carvings of a cathedral, the alignment of a church with the landscape, or subtle motifs in illuminated texts, these traces provide tantalizing hints that Mary Magdalene's legacy continued to resonate across generations. Even modern speculation supports the idea that the bloodline did not vanish. Researchers investigating European noble lineages, sacred sites, and hidden manuscripts often uncover coincidences, symbols, and genealogical threads that suggest continuity. While direct evidence is scarce, precisely because the line was protected in secrecy, the convergence of historical, symbolic, and mystical evidence makes the possibility compelling. The bloodline becomes both literal and symbolic. It carries genetic, spiritual, and cultural significance, intertwining family, faith, and hidden history. Ultimately, the notion of Mary Magdalene's bloodline challenges conventional historical narratives. It forces us to consider that the most profound influences in history may operate unseen, preserved through secrecy, and honored in ways that elude public record. The continuity of her lineage, whether literal, symbolic, or both, underscores the resilience of sacred knowledge and the lengths to which guardians went to ensure its survival. Through art, architecture, ritual, and clandestine networks, her legacy persisted, an invisible thread weaving through European history, guiding events, inspiring devotion, and shaping belief in ways the world has only begun to recognize. The Renaissance and subsequent centuries marked a period when hidden knowledge and sacred lineages became deeply entwined with art, philosophy, and emerging intellectual currents. Mary Magdalene's legacy, long preserved in secretive communities, esoteric manuscripts, and oral traditions, began to manifest in subtle but powerful ways across Europe. While public history often emphasizes political upheavals, religious reforms, and cultural revolutions, a quieter, parallel narrative persisted, one concerned with the preservation of spiritual inheritance, sacred knowledge, and the continuity of the Magdalene bloodline. In the courts of Renaissance Europe, allegorical art, literature, and symbolism became tools for transmitting knowledge that could not be spoken openly. Artists, philosophers, and scholars embedded layers of meaning within their work, often in plain sight, using motifs, gestures, and geometry as a language accessible only to the initiated. Mary Magdalene, as both a spiritual and genealogical figure, appears recurrently in these encoded messages. Her image, her symbols, and the suggestion of her lineage echo through illuminated manuscripts, courtly literature, and even royal heraldry, reminding us that her influence extended far beyond the biblical narrative. During this period, secret societies flourished. Groups such as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other esoteric orders drew upon older traditions of secrecy and preservation, continuing the work begun by earlier custodians of sacred knowledge. Within these societies, the reverence for the feminine divine and for hidden wisdom aligned closely with the Magdalene narrative. Initiates were taught to seek truth, preserve knowledge, and protect legacies in ways that would endure despite political and religious upheaval. Through these networks, her story, part historical, part symbolic, part genealogical, found pathways to survive in an era increasingly hostile to alternative spiritual narratives. The use of symbolism during this period was not limited to art or secret societies. Architecture, for instance, became a silent vessel for hidden knowledge. Cathedrals, chapels, and private estates were designed with deliberate alignments, sacred geometries, and encoded motifs that conveyed spiritual and genealogical truths. In southern France, sites associated with Mary Magdalene exhibit patterns and symbols that echo the lessons, journey, and presence of a sacred bloodline. These hidden markers, preserved across centuries, suggest that Renaissance architects and patrons were aware of an ongoing mission to honor and protect a lineage too sacred to be revealed openly. Literature also played a role in preserving her legacy. Works by poets, chroniclers, and philosophers often contained veiled references to Mary Magdalene, sacred vessels, and mystical knowledge. Allegory and myth became vehicles for truth, allowing sensitive ideas to be transmitted across generations. Even when direct references were absent, the moral, spiritual, and symbolic undertones in texts hint at a continuity of thought, a network of understanding designed to preserve what could not be stated outright. During the Renaissance, the convergence of art, scholarship, and mysticism created fertile ground for the Magdalene legacy to influence European culture quietly. Figures of extraordinary intellect, artists, engineers, and thinkers, may have acted as guardians or interpreters of hidden knowledge, translating her story into symbols, inventions, and teachings that would endure beyond their lifetimes. Leonardo da Vinci, already discussed, exemplifies this synthesis, but countless lesser-known figures contributed to a hidden stream of continuity, ensuring that sacred wisdom and lineage survived amidst the turbulence of history. The lineage itself, whether literal, symbolic, or both, is reflected in both blood and knowledge. Families may have married strategically to protect the line, while esoteric teachings ensured that spiritual authority and sacred insight continued through generations. The Magdalene bloodline thus becomes more than a genealogical curiosity. It is a living conduit of spiritual inheritance, influencing cultural, philosophical, and esoteric developments throughout Europe. Its existence underscores the idea that history is not solely the story of kings, wars, and politics, but also a narrative of hidden threads, guardianship, and the preservation of sacred legacy. In essence, the Renaissance represents a period of flowering for Mary Magdalene's hidden legacy. Art, literature, architecture, and secret societies converge to protect, encode, and transmit knowledge that mainstream history largely ignored or actively suppressed. Her influence, veiled but persistent, shaped cultural and spiritual consciousness, providing continuity for the sacred feminine and the bloodline that carried her legacy. The period demonstrates that while history may appear linear and public, an undercurrent of secrecy and guardianship flows alongside it, ensuring that some truths survive despite persecution, suppression, or deliberate erasure. This era, therefore, serves as a bridge between the early custodians of her legacy, the Priory of Chaon, the Merovingians, the Cathars, and the modern rediscovery of her story. Through Renaissance, symbolism, secret teachings, and the encoded wisdom of artists and scholars, Mary Magdalene's influence persisted, quietly guiding the spiritual and cultural evolution of Europe while preserving a lineage and legacy that remained hidden from the mainstream eye. The convergence of these threads reminds us that the story of Mary Magdalene is not confined to scripture or legend. It is a living, breathing history, quietly woven into the very fabric of European civilization. As the centuries progressed, Mary Magdalene's hidden legacy continued to weave itself into the fabric of European history, moving quietly beneath the surface of mainstream narratives. The post-Renaissance period, from the 17th through the 19th centuries, brought political upheavals, revolutions, and the rise of modern nation-states. Yet the guardians of her lineage persisted. They adapted to changing circumstances, shifting their methods of preservation while maintaining secrecy, ensuring that knowledge of her sacred bloodline endured despite social, religious, and political pressures. This era saw an increasing intertwining of esoteric societies, nobility, and spiritual seekers. Secretive networks, such as the Freemasons and Rosicrucians, provided a framework for the continuation of sacred traditions. Within these societies, symbolic references to Mary Magdalene, the sacred feminine, and hidden knowledge were preserved through rituals, coded texts, and allegorical teachings. These groups, while outwardly engaged in philosophy, philanthropy, or science, also functioned as custodians of a hidden narrative that mainstream history either ignored or sought to suppress. The Magdalene legacy became, in effect, a spiritual treasure passed from generation to generation under the guise of intellectual or social pursuits. The 18th and 19th centuries, in particular, saw a renewed fascination with hidden histories, ancient lineages, and sacred mysteries. Scholars, antiquarians, and explorers began uncovering documents, manuscripts, and artifacts that hinted at forgotten or suppressed narratives. Rennes-le-Château, for instance, emerged as a focal point in the 19th century, when Berenger Saunière reportedly discovered mysterious parchments and embarked on renovations that infused the local church with coded symbols and cryptic messages. Some researchers argue that these discoveries were connected to a broader effort to trace and preserve Mary Magdalene's bloodline, linking her legacy to the Merovingians, sacred art, and hidden networks that had persisted for centuries. During this period, coded manuscripts, obscure texts, and hidden inscriptions became increasingly important. Symbols, allegories, and esoteric teachings were embedded within works of art, architecture, and literature, acting as a silent thread connecting centuries of custodianship. From secretive notations in church records to cryptic diagrams in private collections, the Magdalene bloodline was carefully preserved, documented, and transmitted to those deemed worthy. Each symbol, each carefully crafted narrative, was part of a deliberate strategy to ensure the endurance of sacred knowledge and lineage, shielded from the reach of mainstream authorities. The social and political turbulence of the 18th and 19th centuries further reinforced the need for secrecy. Wars, revolutions, and the consolidation of state power created an environment in which knowledge of a sacred lineage could be dangerous. The guardians of Mary Magdalene's bloodline had to operate with caution, passing information through trusted channels, coded art, and ritualized teachings. The secrecy itself became a testament to the value of the knowledge, a bloodline and legacy powerful enough to warrant concealment, yet resilient enough to survive centuries of upheaval. In addition to preserving lineage, this era saw a renewed interest in mapping sacred history and mystical geography. Explorers and historians documented pilgrimage sites, crypts, and obscure locations associated with Mary Magdalene, linking them to medieval traditions, Qatar strongholds, and ancient relics. This effort to trace sacred landscapes was not merely academic. It served as a form of guardianship, a way to codify knowledge of her presence and influence across Europe. Hidden networks of guardianship, both spiritual and familial, ensured that these connections were maintained, even as political and religious authorities overlooked or actively suppressed them. The 19th century also brought a surge in publications and pseudo-historical accounts, some of which blurred the lines between fact and fiction. The allure of secret societies, hidden treasures, and sacred bloodlines captured public imagination, drawing attention to the possibility that Mary Magdalene's story was far more than legend. While some works were sensationalized or fabricated, many drew upon fragments of genuine historical memory, revealing the enduring fascination with her legacy and the networks that had preserved it over centuries. Rennes-le-Château became emblematic of this convergence of legend, hidden knowledge, and modern discovery, a tangible site where centuries of secrecy seemed to crystallize. Through all these developments, the Magdalene legacy demonstrates remarkable adaptability. From oral traditions to clandestine manuscripts, from esoteric rituals to encoded art, the bloodline and its associated knowledge persisted, resilient to the sweeping changes of history. The custodians of her legacy were both cautious and creative, ensuring that the narrative could endure without being extinguished, providing a bridge between the distant past and the increasingly modern world. This period, therefore, represents a crucial link in the story of Mary Magdalene. It is an era where guardianship, secrecy, and adaptation converged, preparing the way for modern rediscoveries, historical investigations, and the popular fascination that continues today. The survival of her bloodline and her influence during these centuries underscores the enduring power of hidden knowledge and the lengths to which generations of custodians went to preserve a legacy that, though concealed, remained alive and potent, quietly shaping the spiritual and cultural landscape of Europe. In recent decades, something remarkable has begun to stir beneath the surface of collective consciousness. The figure of Mary Magdalene, long reduced to a misunderstood footnote in Christian tradition, has returned, not as a sinner seeking forgiveness, but as a symbol of awakening. Across continents, her name is being spoken again with reverence, and her story, once shrouded in shame, is being rewritten as one of power, wisdom, and sacred union. This is what many have come to call the awakening of the Magdalene Code, a reactivation of a hidden current of divine feminine energy that has been suppressed for nearly 2,000 years. This reawakening didn't begin in churches or theological debates. It began in whispers. Artists, mystics, writers, and seekers began to feel drawn to her presence without understanding why. Some described dreams of a woman robed in red, holding a jar of alabaster, speaking of forgotten truths. Others found themselves inexplicably drawn to ancient sites in France, Egypt, and the Holy Land, places long associated with her legend. These weren't isolated experiences. They seemed to form part of a wider spiritual movement, a pulse echoing through time, calling humanity back to balance. The Magdalene Code, as esoteric teachers describe it, represents more than a person or a bloodline. It is an energetic template, the harmony between masculine and feminine, logic and intuition, heaven and earth. In the ancient mystery schools, this balance was seen as the key to enlightenment. The early church, however, built its foundation on hierarchy and patriarchy, exiling the feminine aspect from divine partnership. As a result, humanity's spiritual understanding became fractured. Half of the divine equation was erased. Now, as the Magdalene Code reawakens, many believe it signals the return of that missing half. This awakening was foreshadowed by modern works that captured the world's imagination. Books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code rekindled the idea that Magdalene was more than the repentant sinner of doctrine. For millions, these stories opened a new door, suggesting that she was not erased by accident, but by deliberate design. While some dismissed these works as fiction, others saw them as modern catalysts, a way for suppressed truths to re-enter the public consciousness under the guise of entertainment. Suddenly, people began questioning what else had been hidden and why the church had fought so hard to silence her voice. Scholars and mystics began collaborating, re-examining ancient manuscripts, symbols, and rituals. The discovery of texts like the Gospel of Mary offered a glimpse into a radically different form of early Christianity, one that celebrated inner revelation over external control. In that Gospel, Mary speaks of transcending fear, knowing oneself, and walking the path of spirit without intermediaries. Her teachings, stripped of dogma, sound startlingly modern, echoes of mindfulness, self-realization, and divine union that resonate with today's seekers. For many, this gospel is not simply a historical document. It is a spiritual code waiting to be reactivated in those who read it with open hearts. At the same time, new movements began to embrace her energy in practice. Modern priestesses, energy healers, and sacred feminine teachers have formed Magdalene circles around the world. In candlelit gatherings and meditative retreats, they invoke her name as a living archetype, an embodiment of compassion, wisdom, sensuality, and courage. These circles are not about religion, but remembrance. They represent an inner pilgrimage to reconnect with what was once lost, the sacred partnership between love and truth, body and spirit. In France, the hills of Provence, where tradition says Mary once lived in exile, have become pilgrimage sites again. Visitors speak of a palpable energy near the cave of Saint Belmé, where she is said to have meditated for decades. Some claim to feel waves of peace and divine presence, as if the earth itself remembers her footsteps. Local legends tell of healing springs and lights appearing near the shrine on certain nights. Whether one believes these stories or not, it is undeniable that a renewed reverence has taken root there, drawing people from every corner of the world. The Magdalene Code also speaks to the transformation of collective consciousness. In an age dominated by technology, logic, and speed, humanity has grown disconnected from nature and intuition. The reemergence of the Magdalene archetype invites a restoration of that lost harmony, a return to listening, feeling, and nurturing. Her energy reminds us that wisdom is not only found in books and doctrines, but in the silence of the heart. She stands as a bridge between the seen and unseen, guiding souls to remember that spirituality is not about separation, but reunion. This awakening has also entered the academic realm. Feminist theologians now challenge centuries-old interpretations of Scripture, arguing that early Christian communities were far more inclusive than history suggests. Archaeological findings, such as the ancient ossuaries in Jerusalem and the retranslation of Coptic manuscripts, are being revisited with fresh eyes. Each discovery, however small, adds another brushstroke to the image of a Christianity that once revered both divine masculine and feminine, a balance that the institutional church later dismantled. Modern psychology and mysticism intersect here as well. The Magdalene Code, when understood symbolically, mirrors Carl Jung's concept of the anima and animus, the integration of inner opposites that leads to wholeness. In this sense, the story of Jesus and Mary is not merely historical. It is deeply personal. It invites each human being to reconcile their inner polarities to embody the sacred union within. The awakening, then, is not external but internal, a shift in awareness where the soul remembers its own divinity. In art, music, and literature, the Magdalene motif has blossomed again. Painters depict her not as penitent but radiant, crowned in crimson light. Musicians dedicate albums to her mystery. Poets write verses of her voice calling across time. Even in popular culture, the feminine archetype once suppressed is re-emerging in countless forms. Strong, intuitive, compassionate, unafraid. It is as though humanity, tired of imbalance, is reaching instinctively toward equilibrium. As this movement grows, it challenges old paradigms. What if the divine was never meant to be confined to a single gender, church, or creed? What if the true message of the Magdalene story was the reminder that every human soul carries both the light of Christ and the wisdom of Sophia within? This is the essence of the Magdalene Code, the key to the grail within the heart, waiting to be recognized. Some spiritual historians even suggest that this awakening corresponds to a cosmic cycle, a return of an ancient astrological alignment, symbolizing the rise of the feminine principle. They point to precession ages, planetary movements, and energetic shifts as indicators that humanity is entering a new spiritual epoch. Whether one accepts these esoteric frameworks or not, the synchronicity is compelling. As the world faces crises of power, imbalance, and loss of empathy, the archetype of the Magdalene rises as an answer, a call for unity and compassion. Ultimately, the awakening of the Magdalene Code is not about rewriting religion, but reclaiming balance. It is about remembering that the sacred is not distant, but alive within every heartbeat. Mary Magdalene, whether historical or symbolic, becomes the mirror of what we've forgotten, that the divine does not demand submission, but invites partnership. Her reemergence marks not the end of faith, but its renewal through love, equality, and inner knowing. And as humanity stands once again at the threshold of transformation, her whisper echoes through time. Remember who you are, remember what was lost, and awaken what has always been within you. The story of Mary Magdalene does not end in the shadows of history or the pages of Scripture. It continues to breathe through art, myth, and memory, an echo of something humanity has long yearned to remember. As we reach the end of this long journey through hidden gospels, secret lineages, and forbidden knowledge, a single realization begins to emerge. Perhaps the real treasure was never a bloodline or a royal secret, but a living truth about the human spirit itself. Mary's legacy, whether literal or symbolic, represents the restoration of what was lost, the reunion of sacred masculine and sacred feminine, the healing of division, and the reawakening of the divine within us all. For centuries, humanity has been searching for the Holy Grail, chasing the idea of a sacred object hidden away in vaults or guarded by secret orders. Yet if the Grail is the vessel of divine essence, could it not also reside within each of us? The ancient phrase saying real, the royal blood, may have never referred to physical lineage, but to the spark of divinity that flows through every soul. In that sense, Mary Magdalene becomes a mirror for the awakening human consciousness, a reminder that the sacred does not belong to the few, but to everyone willing to look inward and remember their divine origin. Throughout this exploration, one question has lingered. Why was Mary's story so carefully buried? Perhaps because her truth was dangerous, not in a political sense, but in a spiritual one. A woman equal to Christ, embodying divine wisdom and love, would threaten any system built on hierarchy and exclusion. To acknowledge her role as teacher, beloved, or even co-redeemer would unravel centuries of patriarchal control. And so, her name was hidden beneath layers of misrepresentation. Yet, despite all attempts to silence her, her story endured. It lived through symbols, legends, and coded myths passed quietly through generations, waiting for the world to be ready to listen again. Now, as the modern world faces crises of identity and meaning, her presence feels more relevant than ever. The figure of Mary Magdalene speaks to the part of humanity that has forgotten how to feel, how to nurture, how to honor the sacredness of life. She represents the compassion that can heal division, the wisdom that transcends dogma, and the courage to stand in truth even when the world refuses to see. Her rediscovery is not just historical correction, it is spiritual medicine. When we strip away the sensational theories and hidden genealogies, what remains is something even more profound. The story of a woman who witnessed truth and carried it forward through love. She stood at the foot of the cross when others fled. She saw resurrection not as myth, but as transformation. the victory of life over fear. In that sense, she becomes the symbol of humanity's potential to rise again, to transform suffering into understanding. The hidden queen of the Gospels, once cast aside, emerges as the embodiment of enduring faith. Some mystics believe that the bloodline of Mary and Jesus is not confined to flesh, but manifests in consciousness. It is the lineage of awakened souls, those who remember that divinity is not above us, but within us. Each generation that rediscovers this truth becomes part of that living bloodline. This interpretation reframes the entire mystery. The royal secret is not about kings and dynasties, but about the birthright of spirit shared by all humankind. To recognize this is to claim one's own sovereignty, the inner kingdom Jesus spoke of when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." In the quiet spaces of cathedrals and ancient chapels dedicated to her name, one can still feel the whisper of that truth. Stained glass windows depict her holding her alabaster jar, her gaze calm yet knowing. Artists across centuries have painted her with eyes that seem to see beyond time, as if she remembers something we have forgotten. Her image, once twisted into a symbol of shame, now radiates serenity and strength. Through her, the sacred feminine rises again, not in opposition to the masculine, but in harmony with it. She becomes a bridge, a way back to unity. Perhaps this is why her legend has survived every attempt to erase it. Truth cannot be destroyed, it only changes form. It hides in stories, songs, and symbols until the right moment for revelation. And that moment may be now. The rise of interest in the Magdalene, the revival of feminine spirituality, and the yearning for balance in a divided world all point to a collective movement toward remembrance. It is as if humanity, weary from centuries of dominance and disconnection, is finally ready to embrace wholeness again. Mary's legacy challenges each of us to look inward and ask, what part of the divine have we denied? What truth within us have we buried because the world told us it was unworthy or dangerous? Her journey from vilification to veneration mirrors the soul's own path, from forgetting to remembrance, from exile to return. The redemption of Mary Magdalene is, in a deeper sense, the redemption of humanity's forgotten feminine soul. As this awakening spreads, her message continues to evolve. To some, she remains a historical figure tied to sacred bloodlines. To others, she is an archetype, a living current of wisdom. But regardless of interpretation, her essence points to the same truth. The sacred cannot be owned, controlled, or confined. It moves through time like a river, reshaping whatever it touches. And now, it flows once more into human awareness, cleansing centuries of distortion. The question that remains is what humanity will do with this rediscovered truth. Will it become another myth absorbed by popular culture, or will it transform how we see ourselves and one another? The answer lies in how deeply we allow her story to reach us. If we see her as a symbol of our own forgotten wholeness, her resurrection becomes our own. The Magdalene's redemption is not just about her. It is about us reclaiming the parts of ourselves we cast aside in the pursuit of power, progress, and certainty. In the stillness of reflection, one can almost imagine her standing on the shores of the Mediterranean, watching the sun sink into the sea. The waves whisper the same rhythm they have for millennia, carrying her story across time. She is neither myth nor saint, but something far older, a reminder that love is the true secret lineage, and remembrance is the path home. As the night deepens, her voice becomes the quiet heartbeat of the earth itself, urging us to remember balance, to honor both light and shadow, to walk once again as partners with the divine. Her legacy is not confined to the past. It is alive in every act of compassion, every moment of courage, every awakening of awareness. The hidden queen of history has returned, not to reclaim a throne, but to remind humanity of the kingdom within. And perhaps that is the real revelation. The Grail was never lost. It was always within reach, waiting for the world to be still enough to see it. Mary Magdalene's truth, buried for centuries beneath dogma and fear, now rises like dawn after a long night. She stands not as a secret to be solved, but as a living invitation to remember, to awaken, and to love without boundaries. In the quiet after the storm of revelation, the story of Mary Magdalene lingers like an echo in the collective heart of humanity. It feels less like an ending and more like the opening of a hidden door, a threshold into a deeper mystery that has waited patiently beneath the surface of history. Across the centuries, her image has been broken and remade countless times, shaped by the fears and desires of those who sought either to worship her or to erase her. But beneath all of that, something constant has endured, a current of truth moving silently through time, waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to remember. That moment feels close now, as if the world is finally beginning to listen. The rediscovery of Mary Magdalene's true legacy has been like watching light filter slowly into a long-forgotten room. At first it comes in fragments, through ancient texts, symbols in stone, or the whispered stories of the faithful. But as the light grows stronger, the outlines of something vast begin to appear, a design that connects faith, history, and consciousness itself. This design is not linear. It spirals, weaving together myth and fact, spirit and matter, bloodline and symbol. The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that her story was never meant to belong to any one religion or people. It was meant to awaken all of humanity. There are those who believe the Magdalene bloodline still exists, woven quietly into the fabric of European history. They speak of secret descendants hidden among noble houses, of coded genealogies preserved by clandestine orders, of the Priory of Chaon watching silently from the shadows of time. Whether literal or metaphorical, the idea holds power because it points to something deeper than ancestry. It speaks of inheritance, not of kings and crowns, but of spirit and knowledge. If there truly was a bloodline born from divine union, then its true purpose was never to rule, but to remind. The descendants would be bearers of memory, carriers of a forgotten truth that humanity once knew and then lost. And what if that truth was never about the body at all? What if the sacred bloodline was symbolic from the beginning, a poetic way of describing the transmission of spiritual consciousness from generation to generation? The holy blood might then represent not DNA, but awareness, compassion, the living spark of divinity within the human heart. Every person who awakens to that spark becomes part of the lineage. Every soul that chooses love over fear, wisdom over ignorance, becomes a child of the living Grail. In that sense, the bloodline is eternal, and its guardians are not hidden families, but awakened souls scattered across the world. Still, the possibility of a literal lineage carries its own allure. Across southern France, small chapels and crumbling ruins still bear the symbols of roses, crosses, and vessels. Local legends tell of families who carried sacred knowledge through generations, their blood mingling with that of ancient royal houses. Some claim that within these lines runs the same blood that once flowed through the heart of the Nazarene and the Magdalene. The Church, it is said, knew of this possibility and sought to control it. For if the blood of divinity could be proven to flow through human veins, the entire foundation of religious hierarchy would tremble. Salvation would no longer be something granted by authority. It would be revealed as something innate. Imagine for a moment what that realization would mean. It would dissolve the boundaries between sacred and ordinary. It would make every human life a vessel of divine potential. Every birth a continuation of creation itself. That perhaps is the true revolution buried within the Magdalene myth. The radical idea that the divine is not separate from us, but expressed through us. No temple or priest could ever contain such a truth. It would spread like fire, quietly at first, then unstoppable. Throughout history, fragments of this understanding have surfaced again and again. The Cathars of southern France spoke of a dualistic universe, but they also believed in a sacred feminine wisdom that could liberate the soul. The Templars guarded symbols that merged Christian and pagan mysticism: the rose, the chalice, the union of opposites. Renaissance artists painted hidden figures and gestures that hinted at secret knowledge passed down through the ages. Even modern mystics, from Jungian analysts to esoteric philosophers, sense that beneath our spiritual stories lies a universal pattern: the eternal dance between love and wisdom, between the Christ and the Magdalene within. Perhaps that is why her story refuses to die. It is a mirror, showing humanity its own longing to heal the divide between spirit and flesh, masculine and feminine, heaven and earth. The Magdalene calls from the margins of history because she represents what was exiled not only from religion, but from ourselves. The more the world fragments, the stronger her voice becomes, a voice urging balance, unity, and remembrance. In that sense, the great secret of the bloodline is not hidden in cathedrals or dusty archives. It is hidden in the human heart, waiting for each of us to recognize our place in the story. In recent years, science and spirituality have begun to converge in ways that feel almost prophetic. Quantum physics hints at a universe where everything is interconnected, where the observer and the observed are one. Genetics reveals that all human beings share an ancient common ancestry, a single thread that binds us through time. These discoveries echo the very message the Magdalene tried to preserve: that separation is an illusion. Whether we speak of sacred blood or sacred energy, the truth remains: we are one body, one lineage, one breath of life expressed in infinite forms. Her story is not about a family. It is about the human family. In some hidden sense, this may be why the legends of the Holy Grail persist. The Grail, whether chalice or bloodline, has always been a metaphor for wholeness. It appears only to those who are ready to see beyond division. The knights who sought it were never searching for an object. They were seeking transformation. In the same way, our modern quest for meaning, for balance between reason and faith, may be another form of the Grail journey. And Mary Magdalene stands at the center of it, the eternal guide leading us toward the realization that the Grail was never lost. It was always within. The resurgence of her story in the modern age feels less like coincidence and more like design. As humanity stands at the crossroads of ecological crisis, spiritual emptiness, and technological obsession, her archetype returns to remind us of what we've forgotten: compassion, humility, presence, and sacred relationship with the world. The Magdalene Code, awakened once more, calls us to embody love as a living force, not a distant ideal. Her energy invites men to rediscover tenderness without shame and women to reclaim strength without fear. In this way, the hidden queen of the past becomes the teacher of the future. And yet, mystery still surrounds her. Did she truly flee to France? Did she bear a child who carried the blood of Christ? Were the Merovingian kings her descendants, their symbols of bees and lilies remnants of a sacred union long forgotten? Or was it all allegory, an elaborate myth crafted to conceal deeper wisdom from the uninitiated? The truth may forever blur between legend and revelation, because that is where it was meant to live. The Magdalene mystery was never designed to give us answers. It was meant to awaken the questions that lead us back to ourselves. Every generation that encounters her story reshapes it for its time. For the early Gnostics, she was the bearer of secret knowledge. For the medieval troubadours, she was the muse of divine love. For modern seekers, she is the embodiment of the sacred feminine rising after centuries of silence. Perhaps that adaptability is her greatest power, the ability to meet humanity wherever it is and lead it a little closer to wholeness. She is not a fixed figure, but a living archetype, ever evolving, reflecting the soul's journey toward integration. If one listens closely, it is almost as though her voice still speaks across time, not in thunder or revelation, but in the quiet intuition that stirs within us when we stand before beauty, when we forgive, when we choose empathy over judgment. Those are her words, unspoken but felt, reminding us that holiness is not in separation, but in connection. The sacred is not locked in relics or rituals. It is alive in every act of love. As night falls over the hills of southern France, the wind carries stories older than memory. In the cave of Saint Baume, where legend says she prayed for decades, candles flicker in the dark. Pilgrims still climb the path to that cave, some out of faith, others out of curiosity, but most leave changed. They speak of a presence there, something gentle yet powerful, like standing before the threshold of an ancient truth. Perhaps it is her spirit, still watching over those who seek. Or perhaps it is the echo of her courage, reminding each visitor that the greatest revelations come not from finding answers, but from daring to ask. Mary Magdalene's story, once buried in dust and denial, rises again as both history and prophecy. It tells us that truth cannot be silenced forever, that love is stronger than doctrine, and that what is divine cannot be confined by human hands. She was not meant to be worshipped as an idol or pitted as a sinner. She was meant to be remembered as a teacher, a reflection of the sacred potential in us all. And so, her legacy endures. It moves through art and song, through prayer and meditation, through every act of kindness that bridges the gap between soul and world. Her bloodline, whether real or symbolic, continues not through royal houses, but through hearts awakened to love. The hidden queen has reclaimed her crown, not of gold, but of light. When the world finally understands that the sacred union she represented was not between two bodies, but between heaven and earth, spirit and matter, human and divine, then perhaps the long exile will end. The story of Mary Magdalene is the story of our own becoming. It is the whisper of remembrance calling us home, the soft but insistent voice that says, "You are never separate, never unworthy, never lost. You are the continuation of the same love that moved through her. You are the living grail." And in that realization, the mystery dissolves. The veil lifts. What once seemed like myth becomes memory, and what was hidden is revealed to have been here all along. The secret bloodline is not a thread of royal descent. It is the lifeblood of consciousness itself, flowing endlessly through time, through each of us forever.